Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the Maharam Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined once again by Rabbi Professor Ephraim Kanarfogel, who is the Billy Ivry University Professor of Jewish History, Literature, and Law at Yeshiva University. And this time on the podcast, which many episodes in the podcast with Rabbi Professor Kanarfogel, we've discussed various different things of the Rishonim and the Bali Taisvis. So now we're going to discuss one of the biography of one of the later and most important and famous, well-known figures, the Maharam Rothenburg, or Mayor of Rothenburg. And so that'll be the focus of this episode. I do want to say that this episode, like the others with Rabbi Professor Kanarfogel, is sponsored by Gluck Plumbing. For all your service needs, big or small, in New Jersey, with a full service division from boiler replacements, main sewer lights, snickouts, cammering main lines. So a simple faucet leak, Gluck Plumbing Service Division has you covered. Give them a call, 732-523-1836, extension 1. And thank you again to Gluck Plumbing for sponsoring these episodes. So thank you. And last time I've said till now Professor Kanarfogel, but the feedback I've gotten is no, it's Rabbi, and they're correct. Rabbi Professor Kanarfogel. So thank you for joining me once again.
Thank you very much. Thanks to your Chaverim, I'm getting very involved with the Daf Yomi Shurim and other things, so I'll admit to being Rabbi. It's okay.
Yes, now Shirley Bornstein has quoted you a couple of times, and now that's
my pleasure. Nice. It's always fun to talk to you, to him, to anybody. It's very good.
Okay, so now, last time, I'm trying to remember what we did the last time, but we've already talked. It's funny because we've talked about the students of Maharam. We did the Mordechai and we did the Rosh. We only didn't do Agais Mamani or some others, but we did them. But we haven't done the Rebbe. We didn't do the Maharam, who's very important. And a lot of listeners are probably familiar with the Maharam, with the jail and dying in jail story, which we'll get to much later on. But that's really not who the Maharam was. I mean, there's so much of Maharam to talk about. So let's start off. When's the Maharam born? Where's the Maharam born? What's the Maharam's bio? Where does he live? What's going on?
All right, here we go. So the Maharam, just to say, in two words, the Maharam is what we would call in Hebrew an Ish Ashkolot. He's really a master of many fields, of many parts of Torah, of Kol Torah Kula. He is what I like to call, forgive me, the last of the Mohegans. He's one of the very last of the Bali Hatosvis. He dies, we know the year that he dies, 1293, in Germany, in jail. We'll get to that. Just to give a sense, one of the last northern French Bali Hatos is Rabbeinu Peretz of Corbeil, who had a connection, who had a relationship with Maharam, both in learning, and he went to see Maharam, he sat with his Talmudim. Rabbeinu Peretz dies in 1297. So effectively, not that there's absolutely no one after them who ever studied with a Bali Hatosis, but those are really the two, one in northern France and Son Sarfat, one in Ashkenaz, the last of the Bali Hatosvis. When the Maharam is born is not so easy to figure out. We've said before, the Middle Ages, nobody is born and nobody died, meaning there's no Bureau of Records. We don't get birth certificates, so you have to have some way of doing it. We can make a hashara, we can make an estimation. We know that the Maharam in 1242, we'll come back to this, was witness to the Sreifas HaTalmud. Interestingly, Shibal HaLeket has 1244 the date, but we'll assume 1242 for now. There's a way to perhaps explain the two dates, but maybe we'll do that later. And he was a Talmud of Rabbi Yechiel Paris. He was in Paris learning with Rabbi Yechiel Paris, other French Bali Hatosvis. So the question is, how old was he then? We don't know for sure. But it means it's hard to imagine that he was born before 1215, because that would make him about 35, 37. It's possible, but it sounds like by that age he was already, so to speak, on his own, as a gadol in his own right. Much later than 1225, it's hard to imagine he was born, because he could have been a 17-year-old bacher, but again, that's sort of the limit there. The middle year, 1220 or so, is the approximate time of birth, probably makes most sense. He was about 20 at the time of the Sreifas HaTalmud. We'll talk about it, but the kina that he writes, Shali Srufa V'Aish, which we said not so long ago, maybe we'll have to say it next year, Be'ez Hashem, and Tisha B'Av will be put aside as an Avelis. He didn't have to write the kina 1 minute after he saw the Sreifas HaTalmud. He could have written it later on. We'll talk. He wrote other piyutim and other slichos and so on. But so that's approximately 1220 to 1293, which means that he's around for a good part of the 13th century, which is the final part of the Tekufas Bali Hatosvis, and he was really a central figure. Now, as we said already, he's from Germany. He really comes from Worms in the Rhineland. He learns a little bit in Germany. They're Abone Würzburg. He learned with the Or Zarua, who we've talked about, who we've done a podcast for beautiful Or Zarua, when he was very young. I actually once wrote, I think we can show it, maybe even before his bar mitzvah. He was his first Rebbe. And he says, Kishiyatzakti Maim, and he quotes Torah from him. Not so much. And apparently there was a short-lived relationship. But again, so he learned in Germany, but he really went very quickly to northern France, where he learned with Rabbi Yechiel Paris. He learned with Rabbi Shmuel Falaise. Again, Falaise is Normandy to the west of Paris, but Rabbi Shmuel Falaise also spent time in a place called Chateau Thierry, which is not far from Paris. So Hastings, he's around there. Orbach thinks he also learned with Rabbi Shmuel of Evro. We've talked about Chachamei Evro. That's much harder to prove. I would like if that were true, but we can't really prove it. But Bekitzer, he spent good years learning in northern France. And in that respect, we might say that Ikar Toroso, his Lamdisha Torah, even though he's a German through and through, Maharam, he comes from Germany, he goes back to Germany, and he lives most of his life in Germany. He's got a very firm a French background to the Balei Hatos. Again, the period after around the Smog period, Rabbi Yechiel Paris, and then he, if you look at his derech, he very much looks like a French Baal HaTosfos in many respects, even though we don't have that many Tosfos, and we'll talk about that as well. So he goes back to Germany. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to jump in. Before he goes back to Germany in his bio, just to explain to listeners, and we talked about this in the past, what does that mean, someone from Germany goes to France? First of all, how common? But second of all, what's the difference practically? You say he was his Torah is French style. What does that mean?
Okay, good. So first of all, in the case of the Maharam, the reason that he went to France, and we've talked about this was really common throughout the period of the Balei Hatos in large measure, except for a period of disconnect. We've talked about it in Israel, like to call it Tkufas HaNetek, right, the separation period. But before, earlier in the 12th century, people went to learn with Rabbi Tom from Germany. In Maharam's case, it was, how shall I call it, rather necessary, because in the 1220s and 1230s, we have the patira of four really outstanding lamdonim in the Rhineland. Reb Baruch, the head Dayan of Mainz, who dies in 1221. We've talked about him. Gigantic Sefer HaChochma, which we don't have. We just have pieces that the Mordechai and others quote, and so on. He dies in 1221, Leminyanam. We have the Ravia at Reb Simcha Mishpira, who dies around 1225. The Ravia, these are all in the Rhineland, of Cologne, of Keln, great Gedolim, German Gedolim, who learnt themselves primarily in Germany. They had some French material, but they know Rabbeinu Tam, they know other things. They die within about a 15-year period, plus 1230 or so, Rabbi Elazar Metz. I'm sorry, correction. Rabbi Elazar of Worms. Rabbi Elazar of Worms, who dies, Sefer Okech, dies around 1230. So with the patira of those four Gedolim, and they're all Gedolim, each in their own right. They're a little different, each one of them, but and I'll come back to what the German issue is, the German learning issue. There's really a gap. The next Godel in Germany after those four is Maharam Rothenburg. The Or Zarua, but again, we've talked about him. He's born in some kind of Slavic land. He learns in the Rhineland. He goes to France to learn. He does too. But then he goes to Vienna. So in terms of people teaching in Germany between, I don't know, say 1230 and 1250, there is no one. The Maharam comes back around 1250. He resumes the German teaching, and he gets a lot of Talmidim. So at 1230, Maharam was either maybe 15, maybe 10, maybe 5. Ein Breira. He had to go to Northern France. I mean, not that it was a bad choice, a great choice. That explains in his case in particular why it was absolutely necessary. And again, also why his French rebbeim sort of outdo whoever he did learn with in Germany. The basic distinction is not seen so much in Maharam himself, but let me mention it. Germans write Tosfos too, much of which have been lost, right? But they mainly write big Sifrei Halacha, right? Discursive, large Sifrei Halacha, right? They're not fighting sugya to sugya, although they do make comparisons. Someone talks about the fact Yudun Epstein was a very interesting scholar of Big Lamden. I never met him. He died decades ago, talks about the German dialectic being more matun, being a little calmer. The French were very, very big thinking. They were the Briskers. They were very big thinkers in terms of comparing and suggesting new answers. So that's what I mean by French. In other words, they're very comfortable with the method of the Balei HaTosfos. They employ it a lot. And even though the Maharam's main productivities, we'll get into in a couple of minutes, are his tshuvas, he's not the first one to write tshuvas in Ashkenaz, northern France or Germany, but he certainly authors many, the most that he authored, plus he has his Talmudim collect of others. It looks like and sounds like on many occasions the derech of the French Balei HaTosfos. And by the way, when we talk about his Talmudim in a few minutes, the Rosh, the Mordechai, they caught that from him too. So it really is it's an interesting connection. In other words, that's the Hashgacha, that's where people are. But the Maharam really is a very interesting mixture here in all these respects. Again, when he goes back to Germany by about 1250, we don't have an exact year. Interestingly, he settles in Rothenburg. Rothenburg, if you take a look, is south-central Germany. It's not the Rhineland. It's not way over to the the far eastern part of Germany. And somebody asked the question fairly, why did he land up there? Now, could be Parnassa, could be other issues, but there's this suggestion, an interesting suggestion, that by the mid-13th century, again, because of what's happening in Germany, there are all kinds of Talmudim, already from before, in central and eastern Germany, even in Bohemia, even beyond that. And so in central Germany, if you think about it, if Maharam's going to be the posek Hador, he's not going to the eastern spur, and he's not going to the western spur. He's going right in the middle. I don't know. There's not much between the eastern and the western spur and the turnpike. But in any case, in Germany there was. So that might be a good answer. It might be, again, he's buried in Worms, where he's from. When they finally get him out of jail, his body, he's buried in the Beis HaKvaros in Worms. He's still there. We have it. But so that is that's also part of this story. Also, we should point out, just in terms, I don't want to mix in too many different factors, when Maharam is producing his tshuvas, that he's roughly contemporary. He's a little bit older than, but a lot of it's sort of chafifa. They cover each other. The Rashba is producing his tshuvas in Spain, in Barcelona. The difference, of course, is from the Rashba, we also have chidushim on many Masechtas. We don't have that exists from the Maharam, although he certainly wrote more than what we have. But so there's something in the air. And in fact, the Maharam and the Rashba are in communication, in no small measure, because some of Maharam's German Talmudim before the Rosh, there are Talmudim of the Maharam who are going from Germany to Spain because things are getting very tough in Germany, as we'll discuss. There's Reb Dan Me'ashkenaz. The Ritva knows about him. The Rashba knew about him. Some interesting figures from whom we have a little bit of material now. Now, why is Maharam writing so many tshuvas? Well, because the Maharam becomes, a question which came first, the chicken or the egg. The Maharam becomes, for cause, what I would call, he says it, the appeals judge, the appeals court for anybody who wants to send them the question, right? So it's not even so much individuals. It's Batei Din, or it's Gedolim themselves, or others, great Rabbonim, who have questions in halacha, could be questions in Lumdus too, but they need to get to the Gadol Hador. And Maharam says he's not sitting on many initial Dinei Torah. It's not the first look. He's getting all kinds of letters and all kinds of people coming to ask him about all these cases. And so the tshuvas are generated an awful lot by his psakim. And again, because these are questions of some complication, he'll write tshuvas. And that's where we have certainly hundreds. Question, do we have everything? Recently, some more has been published based on Kisvei Yad. We have Tshuvot Maharami Rothenburg V'Chavei Rav that my friend Simcha Manuel in Hebrew University published. It's not all from Maharam. It's Chavei Rav, some earlier, some later, but the tshuvas are still being figured out. And already by the late 19th century and even before, people were putting together collections of tshuvas Maharam. Now, there's an immediate problem here that Maharam wrote hundreds of tshuvas, no doubt about it, signed by him. Yes, sir.
Do you have a number of how many tshuvas? Because he wrote, like you said, many tshuvas. Okay. Same time as the Rashba, who also wrote in crazy amount.
Let me tell you why the number is not easy to come by. Because if you open up He wrote shuvas, and his Talmidim collected shuvas of others. So if you want to find shuvas of Rashi before Elfenbein in 1942 published it as a separate thing, if you dial up the various kvatzim of shuvas Maharam from the 19th century and before, even Cremona, you'll find shuvas Rashi floating around there. You want shuvas Rabbeinu Gershom? There are other places too. Go to Maharam. You want Or Zarua stuff? Go to Maharam. You want this? They want Rash Mishans? So French and German. Go to Maharam. And so there are some things in those collections from these great French and German Baliatos from the 12th, 13th centuries, which are found nowhere else. Those obviously are not his. And again, he didn't copy them. Talmidim did for the most part. Again, obviously under his direction, and we'll talk about why he liked Chuvas, not just because of the Din Torah situation. So, for example, just to give an example, one of the more famous collections of Chuvas Maharam that were published, they have them in yeshivas too. I think they were actually reissued in Eretz Yisrael, what's called the Fus Prague, right? The Fus Prague, which was put together as a kind of a defus. I mean, it was put together more formally, I think 1895. And the question which we could ask a lumdische question. Stam tshuva in defus Prague shel mizeh. And you say, well, it's the Maharam. It's Chuvas Maharam. There are hundreds of Chuvas in there. Not necessarily, right? The only time you can know for sure it's a Chuvas Maharam is if his name is on it. I mean, again, he doesn't sign it with his own hand. If it says Meir ben Baruch, we can have Emunas ha-madpisim im lo ha-chachamim, probably Maharam. Interesting, by the way, you have three types of signatures. Maharam ben Baruch sheyichya, Maharam ben Baruch Zal, or whatever the thing, and Maharam ben Baruch Hey Kaf Mem, Hareini Kaporos Mishkavo. And we think we know when the father, Rabbi Baruch, died either in 1276, 1281, so we can actually date Shuvas before or after the Ptira of the father. Anyway, but I go back to my question. Many of the Chuvas, I think the majority of the Chuvas, and again, Simcha Mano has done wonderful work here in Defus Prague, are not Maharam. Now again, they're not some pretenders. It's all kinds of Gedolei Baliatosis. Only if you have the signature do you have a shot. Sometimes you have a collection of Chuvas Maharam where in one place it doesn't have his name, but the exact same Chuvas copy somewhere else with his name. Okay. So therefore we have to say that he wrote himself hundreds of Chuvas. That's why I don't say thousands, because I'm not sure. I haven't counted them all personally. But to get him into the thousands, which the Rashba does have thousands, to get him thousands, mamash would be hard to do. Okay, so but the Maharam is again he's the master of these chuvas, and the question is, I want to talk about his method as a posek, but the questions, and by the way, the chuvas, as I say, are not just here's your shaila, here's your chuva. He goes sugyas. It reminds of Reb Moshe Feinstein's Eichatzadik Livracha. Here's the sugyas. Put this sugya, make it to that sugya, so you can learn whole blot Gemara going through a Chuvas Maharam without a problem, even in not such a long Chuva. But it's based on the Gemara, so I'll come back to that. Why is he writing Chuvas? So again, because he's a Dayan, he's a posek, Rishon, Achron, and everything in between. But Maharam knows, based on the biography of his life, and we'll get to this as we go through, that Jews in Ashkenaz in Germany and in northern France, the Jews in northern Europe are in trouble. Hard to say, That's Tzukei Ha'itim. We know what that is too, but they had it much worse. Well, compared to Tsaris, and not now. Maharami Rothenburg knows that area of northern Europe, right? The Jews of England end up being expelled in 1290. I mean, this is the end of it. This is in the end of his life, but they end up being thrown out of England and many killed on the way out. 1290. The Jews in northern France are expelled in 1306, where Maharam is already not alive, but his body is still in jail. German Jewry, B'nai Ashkenaz, don't actually have an expulsion, but they have terrible pogroms and persecutions. I think we mentioned we did Mordechai. Mordechai was killed al Kiddush Hashem in Nuremberg in 1298. Murdered al Kiddush Hashem. And the Rosh gets out of town in 1303 or 4 when his Rebbe's body is still in jail because he's got to go to Spain, got to get out. Leaves and gets out. So Maharam knows, Chacham Roas Hanolad, he sees handwriting on the wall. This is not the only reason he wrote Chuvas. It may not be the main reason, but it's definitely in his mind. Chuvas preserve the Ashkenaz that's being lost. Right? It preserves the Torah. It preserves it very well. It's not just a parish where he's comparing things. It's literally, this is what this Gadol said, his students wrote up, this is what Maharam said, and so on. So that may be part of the explanation, and we'll actually talk about that. We can talk about that too. I'll just say one sentence, a very big sentence. Maharam is one of the last of the Balei HaTosas, so he's a Basroi, and the poskim talk about him that way, compared to some of the earlier Balei HaTosas. But he's a Rishon for the Basroi, for the Rishonei Ashkenaz who come after him. And what do they write? What does the Trumas Hadeshin write? What does the Maharil write? What does the Maharai write? The Marivayel write? They write Shuvas. And Sifrei Minhagim are written, like the Tashbetz, his student who wrote up all of his Hanogis. That's also a way to preserve things. That also might explain, by the way, I'll finish this theory presently, why several of his greatest Talmidim write their works in connection, dafka, with the Rif and the Rambam. The Perish Harash, we've talked about this, the Piskei Harash, more correctly, is lots of Chomer Ashkenazi Sham, but we also talked about him according to Ramban and others. It's written Lefi Seder Harif. Why? The Mordechai is composed Lefi Seder Harif. You can, correlate the numbers. The Hagos Maimonides, Rabbi Meir HaKohen, the Talmud of the Maharam direct, writes on the Rambam. It's basically footnotes, Ashkenazic footnotes of the Rambam. What is this great interest in the Rif and the Rambam, especially since to this point in Ashkenaz, not that there's no interest, we talked about this too, the Rambam, there's less interest, except for the Smag and others, or Zarua, strategically. The Rif, there's more interest, but either way, the Rif and the Rambam were not, we've talked about this twice, the Rambam is mentioned in the printed Tos and Shas, maybe another half a time, not for now, right? Theories. So what happened here? Again, I think the Maharam is holding, like the Ramban says, right? Things are going to get difficult if we can hook our Sfarim to, not that he didn't think the Rambam was great, he called the Mishnah Torah Urim V'Tumim. But of course, there's one little, I think we mentioned this before, there's one little problem with calling something Urim V'Tumim. That's about as high a compliment as you could get, except for one problem. How do the Urim V'Tumim work? We don't know. How does the Mishnah Torah work? We think we know, but it's, it's the Kesef Mishnah, it's the Maggid Mishnah. But nonetheless, they put tremendous effort into commenting on these Sfarim and using these Sfarim. Why? You hook up all this Toras Ashkenaz to what I don't want to use the bad term, the twin towers of Piskei Sfarad, of Halach and Sfarad, the Ram and the Rif, and as those survive, the Rosh survives, the Mordechai survives. Not that Maharam had a script for this, but again, Chacham Roas and Ola, he's the greatest of the Chachamim. So all of these three things, Chuvas, the new interest in using Chachmei Sfarad, in hooking themselves over, it's a great place to hook yourself, the Rambam and the Rif, and even in writing the Hanhagis, right, like the Tashbetz and all those other things, right, what the Maharam did and so on, it's all preservation. Preservation in a period of persecution. Anyway, but that's a different story. And again, these become the models. The Maharam becomes the model for the later period. And by the way, the later Rishonim are called the Maharil, the Maharai, that's Yisrael Isaline, right? That Yud Aleph had already been taken up by Yitzchak Aboab, so Maharai, Mari Vail, Mari Bruna. The first one who's called Maha, Moreno Arav, is the Maharam himself, because it's the end of the earlier Tkufa, Tnu Kavod La Torah, and that becomes the beginning of the next piece. Anyway, so that's about his Talmidim a little bit. That's about what happens after him. By the way, Reb Chaim, sometimes he uses the middle name Eliezer, Reb Chaim or Zarua, the son of Reb Zarua, Talmud of the Maharam. So even the other Talmidim were very, very significant. Yeah, but notice, by the way, they're all Germans, because again, the French, French stay in France. The ones who learn with Maharam are these Germans who want to get all that French Torah again. They don't have to go anywhere. They can learn with Maharam. So part of Maharam's greatness to get out of this first unit is that he's not just a great posek, he's also a great Rebbe. In other words, he comes back with the French Torah and he teaches it. He teaches the methods, and he's a teacher. Okay. So we'll move here to the last part of Maharam's life. Tell me if you have questions or comments that you want.
Before we move to the latter part of Maharam's life, so talking about the tshuva. So first of all, I think you mentioned this, where Rothenburg is located is that plays a role as well. Not only because he is this appeals court, he's like centrally located. He's located right there.
He's centrally located in Germany. He'll tell me what about. He gets questions from France too, but remember, France still has some gedolim, so they may not need. He may think they don't need him as badly. He's involved plenty of French questions. Trust me, there are cases of Ephraim and persecutions. That question: can they get married? Any big question, again. Ramosha Feinstein is the modern. Any big question goes to Maharam.
So he's a Talmud of Bechimi Paris, but who is the French gadol at his time?
So you have, good. So you have Rabbeinu Peretz, who himself he considers the Maharam he's a Talmud. What do you call it now? A Talmud Chaver of the Maharam. Right, and as he goes to meet the Maharam. If you look at his Tashbetz, he's writing on the Maharam's Minhagim, and he's giving you the French, and he's comparing. He knows Germany too, right? Rabbeinu Peretz, also Rabbi Yitzchak, the author of the Smak of the Sefer Mitzvahs Cotton, on whom Rabbeinu Peretz says he was such a big gadol, he only showed us a little bit of his godless in the Smak. That's why I'm writing on the Smak too. Right, so those are the people. Again, not as big poskim as Maharam, but again, they're the last of the French Balei Those are basically your two key Frenchmen, and there are a couple more. So at least there's somebody to talk to in Germany, except for the Maharam. Again, between the 1230s, you have again in northern France, you have Rabbi Yechiel, you have Shmuel Mifalez, the Maharam's Rebbeim. You have the brothers of Avro who die around 1250, so you get more years out of them. You get some interesting people who are Rabbeinu Peretz called Rabbi Yaakov of Shinon. He's called. It was an interesting gadol. You have some interesting Balei Hatos yet floating around.
Yeah, and what you said, now the gap in Germany, I know your Professor Simcha Emanuel talks about that in his book, Ateres Zekanim, which we'll get to, and he talks about the Maharam and We're going to get to shortly. But also, one more thing about the Tshuvas. So the Tshuvas have now been, it used to be the 4 volumes, Msadav Cook reissued all those old ones. Now it's been redone by Mechon Yerushalayim, beautiful edition. So it's a 3-volume set, volume 1 being Tfus Prague, volume 2 contains Tfus Cremona, Tfus Lvov, Tfus Berlin, and then the 3rd volume is Sefer Sinai, Likutim, and Maftechas. And they explain a little in the intro. So that's, and then there's the 2 volumes of Professor Emanuel. That's like a separate thing. Right.
So you have all of that. Again, I say to all those who want to learn Shuvas Maharam, just make sure his name is on the end of it. Now, by the way, if it's not Shuvas Maharam, like I say, it could be Gedolei Gedolim. But you have to have a scorecard to know. And the problem is the way they printed a lot of those things, they don't always tell you who it is. Sometimes they'll tell you it's the Ravon. The Shuv itself will have the name. Sometimes you won't have any idea, and you think, people have done this. I have a Maharam is so to himself. I get this question all the time. In this shuv he says X, and in that shuv he says Y, and the answer is very simple. Because X is not his and Y is his, or whatever the particular thing is. So it can be used, but you have to work very carefully with this material in order to keep it straight. Yeah. But that's why he is writing lots of tshuvas. In other words, having said that not everything printed in the tshuvas Maharam is his, it's not that he wrote 3 and everybody else wrote thousands. He wrote hundreds, and others wrote, others were put together.
Right, and so I think we explained, his how he paskined, his style of psak. I mean, if you have any examples, I'm sure you'll give examples. But I'll let you continue with the biography.
I want to mention something else here. Very interesting. If the Maharam is a dayan, so you'll say, okay, he probably knows all the precedent, and I'm sure he does, although it's always also interesting, did he have everything from every Baal HaTosas before him? And the answer seems to be probably not. In other words, again, not because he wouldn't look at it, but because it may not have been available. Things get lost, appear here and not there. Somebody published a Rav Yisrael Pellis. He's a very big, interesting fellow. He's the one who worked on the Smog that Mechon Yerushalayim put out. They just put out the Smog. He worked on that too. So Pellis published in 2 Kisvei Yad a very parallel statement where somebody writing about the Maharam, maybe Ruchaim or Zarua, his student says that when Maharam wanted a paskin a din, first he'd look in the Gemara to see what he concludes based on the relevant sugyas. Im kivein das hagedolim, right? If he's with where most of the gedolim are, that's fine. But what happens if they disagree? And by the way, this starts out by saying that the Maharam held that the ones who are Moreh from Sifrei Psokim are Moreh mitoch Mishnos in the Gemara and Sota. Not such a good idea. So it's got to go back to the Gemaras, right? Got to go back to the Gemaras, right? and he would look around, and he would look in the Sifrei HaPsokim after he went through the Gemaras. If he saw that all the poskim disagreed with him, Chazar Bo, or one version has Bitel Daito. If he's against everybody, he would take his lumdus back, even if he thought it worked in the sugyas. The Matzah Deo Sheskimu Daito, right? If he saw that there was some who agreed with him, right? In one version, it's Imra Echot Shaya Maskim Imo. Then Haya Posek Lasher Nisa'oli Bo. He would go it the way he learned the Gemara. So you see here a very, when I say free, I mean free Alpi Torah Sinai, paskin from the Gemara, which is when you can, when you get it right. So you use the Gedolim to check what you're doing, right? That's a very Ashkenazic tchuna, right? That reminds us of the Rosh. We talked about this, the Rosh and Sanhedrin, the Piskei Rosh, Perek Dalet Siv Vov, where basically that's what the Rosh says. You paskin based, in other words, post-Talmudic precedent has to be looked at, it has to be known, it has to be compared. If you want to say differently halacha and you are sufficiently a gadol, this is not to try at home, you are sufficiently a gadol. So again, Maharam, if everybody disagreed with him, right, he didn't say, I'm right, chas v'shalom. Whether, again, one version says even if only one, other versions say some. He liked his pshatim in Gemara. Again, think about Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Bismanenu, so to speak. It's you have to say it carefully, but that's what he did. So this, by the way, reminiscent of a number of Chachmei Ashkenaz, in Balei HaTosas, where they want to paskin based on the Gemara and the way that poskim then look at it, and how do we look at it based on the other poskim. Again, if you're working that way, say this very carefully, you don't have to have every single thing that was ever written on the Gemara, right? You can look at the index. The Rosh, by the way, says if you have a Peirush, and it's very, very unusual, says if you get 10 Talmidei Chachamim, again, of moment to think you're right, you're in. So the same kind of an idea. You can't go off and just, even the Maharam, not going off and paskening, God forbid, against the other poskim, everybody else. But this gives us a very interesting. Maharam, Urbach at one point says, some people say Maharam was a machmir, but it's not true. It's more than that. The Maharam was again a real Baal HaTosfos who looked at things very carefully and checked everything that he could possibly check, and then came out with his psak based on the relevant Gemaras. There's a similar terrific psak. We'll get to this. Maharam wrote some other svarim. One of them is called Hilchos Smachos. There were not so many treatments of Hilchos Avelos. People didn't want to write so much about that, right? Business in Chassam Sofer talks about that later on, right? But the Sefer Chassidim says you should write it anyway. So in his Hilchos Smachos, he has a whole interesting question. What happens if somebody becomes bar mitzvah, not the Sfira Sa'omer, or what happens, God forbid, if somebody becomes bar mitzvah within the Shiva, within the Shloshim of the Petira of his parents? Does he have to go through, how much Avelis does he have to go through? So the Maharam says that it's not completely nidcha, the Avelis. He has to go back. There are things he has to do. The one who's cholik on him bullets, so this is the Hilchos Smachos, we have in a wonderful edition that the Moser Rav Kook put out. If you want to look, it's, I think, there in Siman Kuf Nun. The Rosh in his, in Moed Katan, Perek Gimel, Siman Tzadi Vavdach, the Rosh says, I disagree completely with my Rebbe. And he says, we have a rule, Ein lahashiv, ein lachlok al hari la'achar mitaso. Apparently this was misaso. This was after Maharam had already died. You're not supposed to argue with the Gadol Hador when he's not alive anymore because he can't defend himself. The Rosh says, Lilmod ani tzarich. Medaf learning, I have to give my psak. And he disagrees with him. And I think, like Rav Papa the Gemara Bava Basra that we'll get to in Kuf Lamed and Beis, if you get a psak of mine, right, Rava, to his Talmidim, if you get a psak of mine, you don't understand it, don't use it. Meaning, I would have explained it to you, but if I'm not there anymore, don't use it. So the Maharam is, again, we talk about this with the Rosh too. For people for Gdolim, who paskin based on all of everything, they were able to reach their own psakim based on the Gemara and how the Mefarshim and the poskim work with it. So it's very hard to shoe on, to narrowly defined Piskei Maharam, to put it mildly. Anyway, that's what I want to say about that. Okay. So now where should we go next, Mr. Chairman?
You already mentioned the halachas farm. So before we get to the end of his life, should we also mention there's actually a new edition of Mechon Yerushalayim, other than Birkas Maharam, his sefer on Hilchos Brachos?
Yes, Maharam has a sefer. Again, these are not such simple svarim, right? You go look in Tosas Brachos about what bracha to make on blackberries or whatever berries they are. Maharam has a whole daher there. In other words, he's got it all, and he's got very interesting things there. Anyway, so he has a Hilchos Brachos, he has a Hilchos Smachos. He's an equal opportunity, right? He's got piyutim. He's got, we can talk about Shali Srufo separately, but we have from him now between 18 and 20 piyutim, which we're sure are his. Not just on Tsaris, not just the Nebuch Tekina, but for Yomim Tovim, for Yotzros, and so on and so forth. He was a very big, Maharam was a very big, I say it very gently, fan, but Merchot in quotes. He loved Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. He had the piyutim of Rihal. And so Shali Shrufa Ba'esh, why is it where it is in the Kinos? So that's the Tzion section, right? The Maharam imitated Rihal's piyut, and there were other Ashkenazim who did it too, but his is the best imitation because he's the Maharam. The Maharam is imitating. Won't do the whole thing with you now, but I don't want to relive the whole Tisha B'Av now, but we could do some. It's the same style as Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, namely, he says, Tzion Halosh Soma Sirayach, you Eretz Yisrael, you have to go and bet, you have to ask the Rebbe Shalom, where are your people? Where are your captives? Where are my people? Right? Maharam says, Sha'alisu Fava Eish, my beloved Gemaras that got burnt in 1242 under the instruction of the Dominicans following the so-called trial of the Talmud in 1240. They burnt, according to the Misparim that we have, 24 wagon loads of Svarim, thousands of volumes of Gemara. It's Gemara in Teresh Rapeh. It's not all just Gemaras, but it's a lot. It's a lot. Sha'alisu Fava Eish, inquire you who are burnt up in the fire. Right? Again, where are my people? Where are my lomdim? Same thing. Go to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Right? If Eretz Yisrael comes to the Rebbeinu Shalom will give Eretz Yisrael an answer. If the Shas goes to the Rebbeinu Shalom, he'll give the Shas an answer. And by the way, every line in both their kinos has its one rhyme throughout the entire kina. Asirayich, it's that same rhyme. The Maharam has the same one. All the tzions are like that. So you'll say, but that's not good poetry to have one rhyme. No, that's the best poetry, because if you have to match everything to the same rhyme, you're writing a gewaldige poem, Shiras Kodesh, with one rhyme, with one hand tied behind your back. So it's his style, it's his rhyme, it's his issue, and that's why it's in the Tzionim, because it's the same thing. We found, not me, but people found new piyutim of the what do you call it now, of the Maharam in Kisveyad that were written up by his Talmidim in some cases, and you see one Maharam, one piyut of Rihal, one Maharam, one of Rihal. They're like twins. In general, they like the Maharam, the Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. And actually, I call Rabbi Yehuda Castilian. You see in the Kisveyad. Anyway, but so the Maharam is a pretty prolific paitan. I mean, 18-20 piyutim in a very difficult period is not so simple to think about. Now,
And just to comment on that, so Shali Sruf Ba'esh, that's the really poignant, moving poem about poem Kina that we say on Tisha B'Av about the burning the Gemara. And just by the way, about that burning the Gemara, I have a podcast episode about that topic with the late Professor Robert Chazen, who passed away recently. I did an episode with him a couple of years ago, and there's a book, The Trial of the Talmud Paris 1240. He has a whole lengthy intro, and they translated
very excellent,
the materials. And a really excellent book, like $20. Really, everyone should read that to learn about this time period and what happened there when the Maharam was young. And so there's that on the Maharam. But yes, we can definitely get back. And one more, on halacha, interestingly, the Maharam was also interesting. We mentioned his Talmidim, and I'm sure we'll get back to them more. But Talmidim wrote psakim, and you have today, it's very in vogue. Somebody writes a style that a Rebbe said, my Rebbe did this, my Rebbe did that, my Rebbe did the other, Chavis Lachal Shul Kamenetsky, and all these other ones. But Maharam had Tashbitz Cotton, so not the Chuvas Tashbitz that was familiar. The Tashbitz Cotton was a Talmud writing.
The other Tashbitz are Sephardi. It's Duran. That's a completely different person.
Duran is correct. This is the Tashbitz Cotton, and he's writing his Rebbe's Hanhagis. Also, I think there's a Sefer Aparnis, another Talmud of his. I don't know if it's as much Hanhagis.
It's Minhagei Rothenburg. That's
Minhagei. But so you have Svarim of Hanhagis of what the Rebbe was doing.
Right. But the Rosh and the Mordechai that goes my money is were told, right, Chidushim, in other words, like all right, the Mordechai is Mekabetz, but still, in other words, they were free to call it as they saw it. And as much as the Mordechai quotes the Maharam a lot, so does the Rosh, but again, there's much there that's not Maharam. Same thing in How Goes My Money is. So we'll actually I want to get to his Tosfos and his Gemara material, but before we do that, let me just also add a word. There's another, we had talked about this, I think, together a while back. We also have, Maharam also wrote a Parish on Chumash, right? What's called Derech Remez, right? In other words, this word appears in Tanakh only 1, 2, or 3 times. Mazeh Mashmi'a Lanu. I'll just give you one example. By the way, like the Balaturim, Balaturim lives after the Maharam. Balaturim is the son of the Rosh. There's no evidence that the Balaturim learned with the Rosh in Germany. Again, the Rosh was about 50 years old, 50, when he left Germany in 1304 with his family, right? The Balaturim then was about 25. There's no evidence that he learned with the Maharam, but their Perushim ala Torah, very same style. That was the Chasidei Ashkenaz Remez style, very similar to things we have from Elazar of Worms, some published, some not. And even going back to Rabbi Achas, and I'll talk more about that connection in a couple of minutes. I don't want to split these things completely, but we have, it's published in the Toras Chaim, because most of Rav Kook originally did a version too, Maharam's, what you'll call Masoretic comments, Lefi HaMasora on Chumash. So I'll just give you one that's unbelievable. This also appears in one of his Chuvas. This, I think, Dachzich Mir is in Tfus Prague, number Tov Kuf Yud Zayin, 5517, Dachzich Mir. Maharam, just to show you who he was. Maharam has a tshuva that when somebody, and this will get us to the end of his, the other things in his life, when somebody decides to be Moser Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem, he doesn't feel any more pain. He has 3 proofs. One is from the Shailos, which again, early sowed in Ashkenaz, Rabbi Chananya ben Trajon. And he was taken to Shamayim before. They sent down a not a dummy, but they sent down he didn't feel any pain. There's a little toast like that in Avodah Zarah Gimel Beis at the top. That's some of the same idea. Anyway, the third proof, he says, God forbid, he saw people being burned al Kiddush Hashem, and they weren't screaming. You put your finger in the fire, right? The second proof, the one that's calm, that I could say easily, is from this parish. It says that the word pitzauni appears twice, all right? Once in Shir Hashirim, Hikuni pitzauni, right? I was hit and I was injured. And the other one appears in Mishlei. Do you remember exactly where? I'm forgetting, but I'll remember. I have it. There it says, the word, right? Hikuni pitzauni bal chalisi. I got shmeiced, and I was fine. This pitzauni, I'm wounded. Terrible. This pitzauni, I'm doing great. In normal life, if God forbid you get hit by something, you'll feel it. When you're a Kaddish and you make that decision, bal chalisi, what would be a shmeiss, by you is a garnished. That's what he says. So, again, Kol HaTorah being mobilized. What I like about that tshuva is that's the Maharam. Halacha, Sod, Misora, Remez, remarkable. Anyway, so we have that too. So now let's come back and talk about his Gemara material. I'm sorry.
Before the Gemara, once more to stop you. I feel like this episode is stopping you more than usual. So,
I like
Chumash commentary.
Yeah.
The manuscripts, if it never was ever printed, it never was printed. Where is it? What's the story with it?
Yeah. Why does it appear in the Toras Chaim, which is the Moser Rav Kook? Because in around 1957, Volume 1 on Orach Chaim, in 1960, Volume 2 on Yeridea, and there's one on the Smachos was printed in that series, and there's one on Hilchos Eruvin. There's a fellow named Kahana. I never met him, Yud Zayin Kahana, I think his original name was Farkash, Most Rav Kook published Shuvos, Psukim, a whole collection of Maharam. He was going to redo the whole Maharam, and he did it very, very well. In the introduction in the first part of the Orach Chaim volume, he published whatever we have of this Perush Al Masor and Chumash. So it was published before a couple times, but he published it. I don't know if they still sell them anymore. And the problem is, as an edition of Shuvos Maharam, on the one hand, it's done by the order of Shulchan Aruch, so that's helpful. They're good indices, and it gives you nice Maharam Makomos where else the Chuvas appear. On the other hand, they just republished the 4 volumes of the old Chuvas, because those are not just the yeshivish ones; those are the ones that Amdonim Stam used. So this is I see our host has to now get this in his library. He's got to have every sefer that's printed. Well, so he's going to have to go look to see if he can get a Kahana Maharam. He has it already. Wow.
So disclaimer. I do not have every sefer, but
that's what you would like. That's very good.
But Halavai, but the Maharam, no, not every sefer. Whatever. We're not going to go there.
Every region, whatever.
Got Moinim Rishayim. But so the Mosarach Cook was, and I think it still is available. But like you said, it's not great. The 4 volumes. Machon Yerushalayim did a beautiful job in the 3 volumes. I have the Machon Yerushalayim, but now you're telling me, and I look, it's not there. You're saying, but they're missing the Chumash commentary. You don't have the Chumash.
The Chumash, because that was not the Chumash was put in by the Moshe Rav Kook because this Kahana decided to do it. In other words, he gave them an added value, whatever you want to call it. Not everybody knew. What should I tell you? So now they listen to the podcast. Now they'll know. They'll have to read.
Now the Maharam Chatter listeners know. All right.
They'll have to reprint. No. Then they won't listen to the podcast. Anyway, So I want to do 2 more things. We could do more than that, but I want to do 2 more things. One, his Tosfos, his Chidushim on Shas, and 2, to talk about the end of life, which actually is connected to these things are not disconnected. So probably, with all these Gedolim, with every Gadol, everywhere, you can't imagine how could they do in the hours of the day, how could they do all these things? And we have no answer. The answer is, Manu Kibnei Adam, they're Malachim, and otherwise we're Chamorim. But anyway, they could do it. So, but perhaps because he had to go to all these Dinei Torah and he had to write everything that he was writing, Maharam, we have one Masechta of Tosfos that have been attributed to the Maharam, and that's Maseches Yuma. Not the Tosfos Yeshanim; those are earlier in this particular case. I think I mentioned this one just because it says Tosfos Yeshanim. Those always means later. That's just the Kinui, right? Oh, Alta Tosfos. Tosfos Yeshanim Yuma Yeshanim is Rabbi Yehuda Sir Leon Talmud of the Ri and so on, right? The printed Tosfos on Maharam. So part of that is in terms of what it quotes, but the basic identification was made because on Daf Nun Dalid, the whole sugya of putting paintings into illustrations into Sidurim or on the walls of the shuls, pictures of Tziporim, of Chayas, which you had. This was a shayla that got asked a number of times. The Mechaber in his Avkas Rochel takes it up again. It's a generation by generation question. There's a longer thesis that really is an exact quote from a Chuvas Maharam that he signed. So it sounds like he called his own number, which is fair. That's the sugya. He gave the whole halacha. And there's some other evidence as well. That's really the only Tosfos printed that we have in his name. There are po v'sham where you'll find Tosfos Maharam and the caveats, some people put them out. But what he wrote that we don't have, and we'd like to get our hands on this, and as I tell my graduate students all the time, I tell the listeners all the time, if you find any of this, just hit my email, call up Benachi, and I'll be right there to take a look. I would do whatever I have to do, plane, train, whatever it is. Be'ez Hashem. He wrote Chidushim. He talks about, especially, it's interesting. Let me put the last parts together. In the year 1286, L'Minyonim, so Maharam is somewhere between the age of 70, 60, something like that, 60-something. Maharam is captured. He's in Italy. Some suggest, I think quite cogently, that he may well have been on the way to Eretz Yisrael again. He knows things are terrible shape in Germany. He's got to get out. He's not the only one. He stayed a long time. He stayed longer than the ones who made Aliyah originally, the Rosh Mishans and so on. He may be have been on the way to Eretz Yisrael, certainly a reasonable possibility. And the king of Germany, the Holy Roman Emperor, who has Shlita in Italy, picks him up. His people pick him up, and they bring him back to Germany. And the Holy Roman Emperor puts him in jail, right? His agents bring him in, and he's quote-unquote a political prisoner. In other words, he's not in jail because they, just want to jail him. Maybe they do. He's in jail because they want to make money off of him, right? That's a big shavui, right? We have the head Jewish rabbi. And what begins is an unbelievable negotiation, right? And the negotiation has two parts. There's what the captors want to let him go, to let him out. And there's what the halacha will say about how much should be paid, right? People are already thinking Rav Hutner, right? Hold that thought for a minute. In the meantime, because he's a political prisoner, and again, they don't want him to be worthless, Talmidim get to visit him. People go, they sit and learn with him. He has some Sfarim there. Not that it's the Ritz-Carlton, you can be sure. He was held in two different places. We don't exactly know where either of them was. One is called Migdal and Zinsheim. The Haggadah Maimonides is the one who talks most about these things. But what I'm interested in is he says in a few places that when he was in jail, when he's in this, again, he apparently had paper and a pen. He got Sfarim. So what does he do? He's writing up his Chidushim to Bav Mitzvah. He's writing up his Chidushim to another Masechta. We don't have these. Again, does Chidushim mean Tosfos exactly? Is Chidushim, beyond it? Is it above it? Lo barur, right? And he says very fascinating things there. He says, interestingly, he apparently was doing a lot of Bav Mitzvah, though, because he Hilchos Poalim, he had a lot of material there. Chidushim, Atzumim, Dachim Moshe calls a lot of it. The first stuff, for the first Mordechai's and Bava Kama, is a whole thing about when you pay somebody, you can pay somebody in what they're working with, right? So the problem is if they're working on apples, you can't give them $10 million in apples. They'll be rotten by tomorrow, right? So give the halacha. So the question, feathers, how do you do it? So the Maharam has a clear there about how to figure this out. He says, and the Baal HaChalom told him a new pshat, or told him a pshat there. So he said, the Baal HaChalom, what's going on here? Lo b'shamayim. So first of all, Baal HaChalom, Rashi and Sanhedrin Daf Lamed, the Malach, the Mamuna on the Chalomos. What's going on here? So I think the answer is very interesting. In Dini Mamanis, right, again, is a Chalom a Psak? Is it a Birur? In Dini Mamanis, there's always a winner and a loser. One person wins, one person loses, right? In a Psak Halacha, it's either kosher or treif. Either it's good or no good, right? So using the Baal HaChalom here is a whole different level. I wrote a whole article about Chalomos and Halacha and Ashkenaz. I can send somebody to it if they like. But actually, you know where it is? It's in the Sefer HaYovel for Chazin. But anyway, Olav Shalom. Anyway, he said he's also quoted on another Chalom that he changed his psak. He again had a Chalom, and he changed his psak about how a poel can be choser b'emtzayom. He can be compensated. He can be, again, dini mamanis. But he's writing. He says, and I'm writing my chedushim on Bav Mitzvah. And what is he doing? He's thinking and learning. So he's learning by day. He's learning by night. He's, again, I want to be very careful to falozech on a chalom in any way. And whether the chalom just means he rethought the shir and people can talk about it, right? You have the wonderful Reuben Magoli, Shubna Hashem as al hakdama, right? But it means you can consider days. He rethought all the days. He was thinking about it by Yom V'Layla. So that's what we really like to. I don't want to get people too caught up with the chalomas. But the good chalom is we'd like to find these chidushim, right? In other words, so if you see something that says it's chidushim, Maharam, Rothenburg, L'Maseches X, let us know. They certainly exist, in snippets here and there. But again, so even though he doesn't write a lot of Tosfos that we have, he might have written a lot that we don't have, he did write on Shas, and maybe there's still a lot there that should still be thought about. Yeah, what do you say?
And so Tosfos, like you said, Yuma we know is his Tosfos. Did he write others? And does he have a style? Obviously his student the Rush put together, whether he wrote it or it's compiled. We can talk about what it means to write a Tosfos, especially in that those later generations. They were adding and adding.
Talk about that. The Rush's Tosfos were primarily he took an earlier piece and he added. What
about Maharam? Right. So what about Maharam?
Well, so that's why I think, good question, because I don't have it, I don't have the answer, but I think that's why he calls it Chidushim. It's interesting. Nobody in Ashkenaz, right? Chidush Ramban, Chidush Rashba, Chidush Ritva at the same time.
The Ra'ah.
Right.
There's tons of them.
The Talmud Ramban, the wie heißt dann Psachim, Reb David,
David. Yeah, you have every Megash.
Yeah.
Gayas or it's Gayat. You have plenty.
Nachon. In Ashkenaz, so I'm thinking that Chidushim means, on top of the Tosfos, right? But Ein Lanu. So, and maybe that's what Yuma really is, Aval Ein Lanu. So that's how the Maharam gets to be a big Meshiv, a big Baal HaTosfos, a big everything, right? There's almost nothing you can think of that the Maharam didn't get himself involved. Yeah, but that's, again, we still need more material in order to what do you call it?
Right.
In order to make a kviyus there, yeah.
Now, we've spent almost an hour here, and we haven't gotten to. Everyone's like, well, Maharam in jail. The Maharam getting in jail. The famous Marshal. Maharam in jail. Did he? And then, we'll get to Professor Emanuel's article in Ateres Zekanim was,
right.
Did the Maharam, what the Marshal says, he refused to be ransomed. Is that really? We have other sources from the Rabbi Ben Arash. What's the story there? Let's say over the story.
So
even say the story, so that everyone makes sure everyone knows.
Yeah. Well, so the basic story, again, just to keep to the parts that we can say are for sure, again, they imprisoned him not because they just wanted to have him around to ask questions to. They imprisoned him to collect. And so there begins a whole negotiation here between many Jews in the Jewish communities in many places. And how much should we give in for the Maharam? The Rosh is involved in that. The Rosh actually plays a very significant role. The problem is, at some point, they come to the Sugi and Gittin, right? The Rosh there has material. They come to the Sugi and Gittin, right? Pidyon Shvuyim, right? Yes, how much should you pay for the Gadol Hador? And should you go and give everything you have? What's the problem? The problem is that they chop the first Gadol Hador and you give everything. Then they'll come to the next one and say, okay, give us the next everything. I mean, it may be diminishing returns. Again, by the way, this was precisely Nachi, I think. So a lot of what happened to Rav Hutner, right? The Talmidim came and they said, when he was on that plane, and they said, we'll give billions. And again, supposedly Rav Hutner himself was not basking. So that's the question. So the reports, and it involves the Marshal, so I'm very hesitant to say too much. But the Marshal suggests that it's the Maharam himself who says, nothing doing, right? Don't go overboard. That's hard to find attested to in sources of that time. I'll say very gently, or carefully, I hope, that we have other cases where the Marshal on Bali HaTosfos, Marshal, mi Gadol ke Marshal, right? The Marshal says that Rabbeinu Tam had 80 Talmidim. We can't find them. So, again, and as far as Hashem Elokeinu, I'm not sure what to say. So, my friend Emmanuel, thinks the Marshal had a later tradition here, that's not exactly what happened historically. Not clear, can't prove it either way. That's what I'll be more careful, yeah?
Yeah, no, it definitely is a careful subject. And so the Marshal is in Yam Shel Shloima, just to say Yam Shel Gittin.
Who dies in 1572. So not that
he says Shomati al Maharam. He says he heard, and to be clear, the other source, the main source Professor Emanuel brings, the other side, is not a nobody. It's a Yehuda ben Arash, and it's Sava with a manuscript. And he explains why the Rosh left Germany, and he says the reason that he left is Rabbi Meir Rothenburg Zal Shetavsu Amoishel. That he was captured by the king,
the ruler,
Rudolf, I think. Ashkenaz. Padu b'mamen rav. They redeemed him for a lot of money. He says they only wanted to accept a Rosh as in his place, as the guarantor. Before they give out the money, they already had redeemed. He died in jail. Before they let him go, he died. Who should you part him have to pay? He left away. Therefore, he was scared. He left. But it sounds like he was redeemed. There was no no, he didn't want to.
They were working on it. That's right.
One of the things that Professor Emanuel says here in his article, I thought was very compelling, is perhaps it was the whole shtickle, the whole reason why he didn't want it was there was this crazy amount and they were going to go do this to everybody. Right. So maybe because they still didn't work, he lowered it, and then the Ram said, "Okay, now you could do it," and that's why there's the two competing. That's one of the asharis that he says maybe that's what happened.
possible.
Yeah.
Right. So we could say it's a Rabbi Yehuda ben Arosh against the Marshal. And Rabbi Yehuda Arosh lives much closer, right? Rabbi Yehuda ben Arosh. It's interesting. Rabbi Yehuda Arosh was probably not there in Germany only because his father had sent him. He talks about that too. He had sent him, Eretz Goshen, go check out Spain. We got to go to Spain, go check out Spain. So the Kitzer, what's true is that this is, if you think about it, Ki Ba'eshi Tzato B'esh Asad Livnosa, when he was 20 years old, the Maharam sort of, or 15 years old, 22 years old, the Maharam sort of Sreif Talmud. That was the opening of his life. His life ends in jail. And of course, the rest of the story, and this there's no plukta about, he dies in 1293 in jail. He doesn't get out. In other words, the deal didn't work because of this. Very interesting, by the way, these Arevus issues. There's a whole Takonos Rabbeinu Tam that nobody knows about with this issue, that Ramosha, that the Reb Chaim or Zora quotes in the name of Ramosha Mikutzi, and people don't even know about it. I found this almost by accident. He has it in his Shapansky has it, but then and Finkelstein has it. But so this issue of Arevus, very with rulers, very complicated both in halacha and in mitzias. But anyway, less man de polig. What happens after that is the Maharam is not redeemed, and he dies in jail, and his body stays there. They're not letting his body out either. 14 years later, in 1307, 14 years after 1293, after he died, the Rush is already in Spain. He's not just in southern France. He's already in what do you call it? In Toledo, Spain, not Ohio, right? He's already in Toledo. He's out. There's a very wealthy Yid named Rabbi Alexander Wimpfen, Kach Shmo, who puts up the money, puts up a fortune, whatever the fortune was, and he only has one bakosha. He wants to be buried next to the Maharam's goof. And if people go, I'm a kohen, so I can't go in, but I have pictures. If you go to the Avurm's Beis HaKvaris, which it got bombed in World War II, but it was the best preserved Beis HaKvaris in that whole area. There are all kinds of matzevas that got broke. They fixed a lot of them. I once mentioned the fellow named Brockett. I think Lamed Vav, one of these Hasidic Umus Holo. They put them together. But anyway, you'll see there the Maharam's matzeva next to the Representative of Infinite says he's the one who got him out. So you see how that also just shows you how difficult it was. 14 years, his body, Hatova Meitiv, Nitan Lekvura, 14 years it took.
And so Worms, I think the Heiliger Sand Cemetery is one of the oldest cemeteries in Europe, the oldest Kfarim, and so you can go see it. So interestingly, listen, this year, the Alexander Wimpfen, everyone knows his name, he's right there for something like the Maharam, but is the Maharam, I don't know, maybe we've asked this in the podcast before, is he the only Baal Toises that you can go visit his kever, and you can go to David kever now? Is he the only one that we know Vadai, that's his kever?
Again, it's been a kohen, so I'm not an expert, but I'm supposed to be expert in other things. It is Kenzan. It's Kenzan. By the way, one of the broken matzevis that this Bracha once showed us, I once went to Germany to get, they said they would give money to the Jewish community if a few of us showed up and gave some talks. So my mother, Aleh Shalom, didn't want me to go. I said, Lahatzil miyodam. She said, okay, just don't spend a nickel there and come right back. And that's what I did. They brought me food from the Frankfurt airport on the Autobahn because I wouldn't eat anything. Anyway, from the comment, whatever. Anyway, so he shows us a matzeva. And he goes, it's in two parts. Reb Menachem Bar Yaakov Tana. This, he said, anybody knows this? I said, oh, that's the uncle of the Rokeach. That's Reb Menachem the Av Bezdin and Worms, who wrote many piyutim. In fact, we said one of his piyutim on Tisha B'Av. It's Reb Menachem ben Yaakov. Anyway, so you could see a few others. That might be. You have. The question is of Rishonim. That might be one of the few. You know what? I have to check it Nachi further. I could get this Brock. He's a very old person, but that might be one of the few.
And I say this because Kfarim going on tours and visiting Kfarim is a big deal today. And maybe Germany, like you say, people don't want to go, but Germany has a wealth of Kfarim still, and they're around. But you can go, Skula is going to Kfarim, you can go to Baal Taisfis, you can go to the Heilig Maharam, you can go to his kever. We know where his kever is, Vada, you know where it is for sure, there's no questions.
There's no doubt about it.
He's buried there. And so, what kind of amazing thing? I don't know, people, we should, make an event to the Skula. People should go there. I want to say this very carefully.
The Rashi Shul in Vorms, the Germans built as a kapora. That's not, there was an old part of the building, but still not from Rashi. But this kever of the Maharam is the real McCoy. They want me to go on some of these tours. I said, I can't go to the big Batei Kvar. They said, we'll take anyway. Well, anyway, so I guess if I ever go, I'll get more reports. But maybe Rav Schechter knows.
It's hard for a kohen. I went last year to Prague when we had a kohen on the tour.
Very
Rosen was on the tour, and he came anyways. But you can't go around because the kohanim can't go to the Beis HaKvaros. It's hard.
I have to tell one thing about my father. My parents were in Eretz Yisrael on some tour, and they come to Tveria, and I think it's Tveria, and the Rambam, the Kever Rambam, right? It's I think it's Tveria. Anyway, and the tour guide tells my father, it's a frum guy, he says, the Rambam's probably not buried here. So my father says to him right away, but nebuch some yid, other yid is. It's a kever. He said, I'm not getting off the bus. Difficult people he's going on. Anyway, that's my father's. Anyway, So by the way, so let's get back to the history here and the halacha. So in 1242, he has that tzara. In 1286, he has that tzara. But wait, there's more. Failed in Kansaras. I just want to mention one more. We have a, because it's an interesting tshuva. We have a tshuva from a Maharam signed by him. No doubt about it. It's a famous tshuva. Koblenz Ir Hadamim. Koblenz is a little town and a little smaller place in the what do you call it, in the Rhineland. The city of blood. Yeah, I think 1265, maybe a couple of years earlier, there was a pogrom. They came to kill the Jews of Koblenz. And this Yid writes to the Maharam. He says what happened was, they're not really crusade, whatever. The murderers are coming around the corner, and so Kiminig Ashkenaz, he nebuch shechted his children, Altar Sakodesh, and his wife, and he's about to shecht himself, it seems, and the pogrom stops. So, he says he didn't take his own life. He says to the Maharam, do I need a kapara? Could you imagine getting that shaila? Maharam again in 1260. Is he 40 years old? Is he? Do I need a kapara? So interestingly, the Maharam doesn't quote the Tosas in Avodah Zarah Daf Yud Ches that if you're afraid of torture, that's the heter. Doesn't quote that Tosas. There's a Raviyah that was found only recently, quoted by somebody else, that Osam HaKadoshim Sheshachtu B'neim V'atzmam, or Atzmu B'neim, it's out of order, right? The same lumdus as the Rabbeinu Tam in the Tosas talks again about Al-Tam B'atzmachad Yomoscha. Torture is there's a halach of torture. There's a sugin, there's sugyas. Doesn't quote that either. Did he not have them, or did he want to say his own? Again, he quotes a very unbelievable drasha from the posek Aches Dimchem, right? You can't take your own life. And there's all Yachol Kishol, Talmud Amarach, but that may not apply to everybody. He has the alumnus where he has two miyutim, and he says one of them covers this case. And he says, if I make you do a kapara, it's Motzi Laz al Harishonim, which is a halacha in that kufa in Ashkenaz. Motzi Laz al Harishonim isn't an excuse. It's a halacha. Rabbeinu Tam, others quoted it. And he says, and we have evidence of Reb Kolonim was this one, that one, and therefore you need no kapara whatsoever. Could you imagine such a shaila? It's in that, by the way, you know who has that? Farkish, that guy that Moshe Rav Kook has it in volume 2 in Yoredeya Dachzich at Siman Nun Tes. You could look it up. So that's what he got in the middle. And there were others. I won't, I don't want to make everybody nishkut, but that's it's the halacha. So his entire life is sorrows of unbelievable proportion. And what is he doing? Chuvas, Perushim, the godly Zarishan, Kinos, Slichos, and so on. You name it, he wrote it. Ramozim. So you're right. You go to his kever. That's a pretty good kever to get kapara by going, to do tshuva. I think that's much of what I want to say. What did I leave out, Mr. Chairman?
No, I think we got to a lot of things. The last thing I really want to finish off with, that, of course, we could have gone on and on with many different of his
we could do all day and all night.
But what I want to mention is the reading. So a couple of things. You mentioned now why everyone should buy I'll mention the editions, and then I'll ask you about suggested read. But the editions, so there's the 4-volume Masada of Cook. I think it's still available. We talk about the Chumash in there. There's the 3-volume New Beautiful Machoni Rishalayim edition. Right. There's the Tashbitz Cotton Machon Yerushalayim. I think it's still around. There's the Birkas Maharam Machon Yerushalayim. The Sefer HaParnis, which is the Talmud of his.
Right.
Yeah, obviously, I've got my money in the Mordechai Rosh, whatever. That's all around in the printed.
No, but you have the Machon Yerushalayim Mordechai, which we
the 4-volume, which we did a podcast about exactly.
Yeah. And by the way, there's Chuvas Maharam in there that you don't know from any place else. Go ahead, next. Go ahead.
Shailos Rubation, the Kinnis. Those are all these are all the main texts. Now, suggested reading. I mentioned Professor Emanuel's book. He talks a little bit on the Teres of Canaan from Magnus. Right. There's the 2-volume Irving Agus through Dropsy College. You can get used. Really nice. So that's a bio. It has a lot of translated shuvas. You want to talk about that a little?
Yeah. So Professor Agus, all of our shalom, his name was Irving A. Agus, Avram Yitzchak Agus. His family was related to the Marcheshes, Agashevsky. He had a brother who was apparently a very big lamdi, and another brother who went off in a little different Jewish thinking. But anyway, he didn't like it. I was his last master student, I think. I was a kid. I was 20 years old. He was a very knowledgeable fellow. He could learn too.
Where was that? Which university was that?
At YU, when I was an undergrad, when I was a kid, right? I was learning about a Rav, and I was doing I don't know, before I went to when I was still in college, I was doing math. I don't know. I don't want to tell you my whole history, make people nervous. But anyway, she was very good to me my entire life, till now. So Agus, whose father-in-law was Harry Fischel, who's a big Nadvin in Eretz Yisrael.
It says Harry Fischel paid for this. Harry Fischel was a major philanthropist.
Yeah, was his father-in-law. Anyway.
Oh, wow.
So Agus lived in Philadelphia. At that time, he wasn't. The book came out in 1947. What does it say in the publication date? I think it's 47.
1947, the Dropsy College for Hebrew and Cognitive Learning. It's a Dropsy College.
Yeah, so he lived in Philadelphia. I don't know what he was doing exactly. He was teaching there. And he told me he used to come in on Sundays on the train and go to the 42nd Street Library. And he'd sit there week in, week out for years. He found as many Chuvas Maharam as he could find. He translated them into English, the ones that they thought were most important. He wrote a 125-page introduction, which is still very good. Again, it's 70 years old. How many years old is it? There was nothing like that at the time. So people, and he used to have all kinds of theories about, by the way, Maharami Rothenburg. Oh, I know what I forgot. Okay, Maharami Rothenburg on Shilton HaKol, whether unanimity, majority. I'll talk about it in a second. Lots of today called Ashitas. Remind me to come back to that. Anyway, he wrote great stuff. People made fun. It was a little bit exaggerated. There's too much. He's trying to do too many things. There was nobody else working. I do this today. I have people, although unfortunately some of them don't stay around forever. It's derech ha'olam. I have people to help me. I have people to talk to. He was doing it by himself. So it's such a wonderful piece of work, and you can get a good flavor. The English translation is great. He gives you Maharam McCamus. Yeah, it's very, very good. And he was a wonderful person, a very good scholar. And he was working when nobody else was working. Anyway, lots of they call Ashitas. So, and he has some there's a Chuvas Maharam that appears also in the Mordechai in Ksubis with, again, you compare in the little addenda case of there was a case of a husband who had gone away, traveling in the Middle Ages, went on business, and he doesn't come back. So there were two different sets of Eidim, or two different informants who came to inform, who claimed they saw his body. They saw him. They had goyim, some hunters, mesichim lefi tumam, that he was in some kind of a shallow grave, like a watery shallow grave. I think it's the Mordechai version is in Ksubis Tachtzach Meir Simin Shunvav, but if you don't find it, don't trouble yourself. Shunvav, I think it should. But anyway, you could email me. I'll give you the right one. I'll check it. They claimed the goyim claimed he was dead in a shallow grave, in which case his wife's an almona, get married. But he had a brother-in-law who said, no, he saw him in France. He was running around somewhere. The brother-in-law was a Yid, but the brother-in-law was Azam Mishumid. Maharam says, Tovel v'sheretz biyodo. He would do tshuva, then he would go back. I wrote about this in one of my books. There were people who, for parnos and fadreit, they would come in, they would go out, they would make money from Jews. There's a tshuva Zarash, but he says that Rabbeinu Yonah, when he learned in northern France, saw people like that. Anyway, so Maharam says, so in this corner, you have a Jewish guy who's a shtickle meshumid, whatever that means, but who comes back. And, I don't have the whole history there. And on that side, you have Tzvei Drai Goyim, Maharam says, I'm passing like the goyim. It's a case of lefitu masam. It's unbelievable. Mi godel kamaram. I mean, he's right. He does all the halachas. So just to show you what kinds of things, the more you talk about the Maharam, that's what the Rav said pshat in the posek. Midei dabri bo zochoras karenu od. The more you talk about him, the more things you remember. In any case, lots of they call hashitas. The Maharam was a master. I once wrote an article about 25 examples. Who's the one who said on between first day Rosh Hashanah, second day Rosh Hashanah, the Shechianu get a new fruit, get a new beged? Maharam. Who's the one who said, right, the Gemara has, which part of the bread should you cut? The one that's gekocht the best. Machlokes in northern France and Germany, one said, the top of the loaf is the best part. And the other said, no, the one that's on the bottom gets cooked best. Maharam, cut on the side. Yeah. Lots of they call hashitas. Tefillin by mincha, even though that's not exactly a compromise, is Tisha B'Av like the first day of Avelis, no tefillin, or it's like the second day? Big machlokas rishonim. What did the Maharam do? Put tefillin on by mincha. It's not exactly let's say they call hashitas, but it's take it down the middle. And this works. In his day, there was an interesting, still a machlokas minhagim. The first one of the early Mordechai's Masechus Megillah, but again, I have it all together. Do you make a Sha'asa Nisim by the Megillah in the daytime? So the Vel generally paskins, of course you do, like the Rabbeinu Tam. Somebody told me, I hope I'm not getting it wrong, that even today, Yekes, real Yekes, L'fiyam Masora, don't make a Shechianu in the daytime. Why? Because there's another shita, right? It's a question who's the machlokas between, but even among the Balei Atos, right? The Rashbam, Rabbeinu Tam, others. So Maharam used to make the Sha'asa Nisim belachash. He would say it real quick. He would make let me be careful. Do you make a Shechianu by the day? You just read it last night. Rabbeinu Tam says you do, because that's the Ikar Kriya by Yom. So the Shechianu was reinvigorated. And others say, right, the Ram, others, no, because he just made the bracha. So the Maharam would take the Shechianu and zoop it up somehow. How he did it, I don't know. Quietly, lots of steikol hashita. So nobody, right? So when they answered Amen on the first bracha, they get that bracha too. Also had to do with whether you make a bracha on other Megillas too. Reb Simcha Mishpira, Machlokas, Balei Atos as well. Anyway, there are tens of these. He has it in Hilchos Nida. One of the most interesting ones is on communal government. I think we once talked about this in some context. So many held Achrei Rab Lahatos, right? If the Tuvei if the majority say, let's do this way, that's all you need, because you can't get everybody to agree. Al Pirov, like Bezdin, it's like a little bit like a mini Bezdin. The other shita, which Rabbeinu Tam and others held, was no, you need haskamas kulam. You need a kind of a consensus. You got to get an agreement. So it's a lot harder. Getting all the Yidden to agree is not easy, but you got to do it. So the Maharam went like this. This is actually one of Vegas' favorite topics. If in Migdar Milsa, if it's to improve the Kehillah, to build a bigger shul, another shul, mikveh, this or that, whatever you have to do, go with Rov. If it's taxes, how do we apportion the taxes, right? By household, by people, then you have to have haskamas kulam. Again, lots of sidei kol hashitas. So I will conclude this part by saying, more than 50 years ago, and I'm not going to reveal my exact age, but I'm 21. More than 50 years ago, I was sitting in Rav Shechter's shul before I went to the Rav when I was just beginning after high school. And Rav Shechter quoted from the Karliner Rav, from the Mishkas Yankiv, Siman Nun Kuf Nun Hey, the Chassidei Ashkenaz like to be Yotzei all the Shitas. So I came to him years and I said, Rebbe, that's the Maharam. The Maharam was a very good Talmud of the Chassidei Ashkenaz. Not only by these Masoretic interpretations, Maharam has by Shalashudis the issue of not drinking water is to have Psichas Halev. Right, the issue of water, unless you have to start eating before. Psichas Halev doesn't mean, God forbid, a open heart surgery. It means to open your kep, to remember things, again, from the Hechalot. You should remember it well, you should learn well. The Maharam has all kinds of interest. We talked about the Baal HaChalom, you don't have to be a Chassidei Ashkenaz for that. But, so the Maharam has it all. He has frumkeit, he has godless, he has all kinds of, more than fascinating things. And Agus actually found a lot of these things, initial versions. I don't know if he had all of them, but by now we have even more. So, lots of today called Ashitas. So that's what. Also, by the way, Maharam fasted 2 days Rosh Hashanah, fasted Rosh Hashanah. The whole thing's up. Yom HaRichter. That's question 1 day, 2 days. What do? Maharam is unbelievable. The more you scratch the surface, the more you find further material.
Yeah, and it's just, hopefully this podcast is enlightening to listeners because, not hopefully, I'm sure it was, because people know about it from the jail. Yeah, so that's what they know. And the Agus' book, I just got it from Mizrahi. It's available. You can still get it used. Yeah. Also, interestingly, there's a historical fiction novel based on the life of Maharam Rothenburg. I don't know if you know this. It's called The Fruit of Her Hands, the story of Shir of Ashkenaz. So they made up like a fictional wife of his. That part's a little bit there. But a lot of the facts are good in there. It's a story. Listen, it's interesting.
That's like the daughters that's like the daughters of Rashi. They quote some of my stuff and I go, wait a minute, Tim. Yeah, but this is better.
One is better. This one is better than the daughters of Rashi. The daughters of Rashi is just like
one is better. You're right.
Did you read it? Did you read this book?
I saw it. I can't. I
read it. I read the book.
If I start reading it, I get nervous. So I turn the page.
Some parts of the book will make listeners nervous, but the other parts were good. If you like historical fiction, I think.
Not just in terms of Frumkak. Some of you look at the facts.
I understand what you mean. Yeah. Historical fiction. I was just talking to a friend the other day about historical fiction because I can't read historical fiction because I don't know what's true, what's not true, and I can't read it. On the other hand, people say it's an easy way to learn history, so some people say it's good.
By the way, there's a woman named Barbara Tuchman. I don't think she's still alive. She's a historical a novelist, and she wrote a book, The Calamitous 14th Century on the Count of Kusi. And in there, she has real stuff from Moshe Mikutzi and other, and because that wasn't the main subject, she kept it pretty straight. So somebody said to me, I just read that book. I said, her stuff that actually I read pretty carefully, pretty accurate. But again, that wasn't her main subject, so she was just trying to give a little color, so she didn't want to get in trouble with the. I guess with the Eden.
All right. So listen, I'll link to whatever I can come across, some things in Maharam in the show's notes, and I will also want to thank again Gluck Plumbing for sponsoring this episode, and we mentioned in the past. Mitchell will do more episodes and always ask for suggestions. So, we've mentioned Rabbeinu Tam, maybe him, maybe somebody else. Maybe you have another idea. We've mentioned some other ones. There's so many. Rakech came up today. By the way, he's a fascinating one. That's your early book, Chassidei Ashkenaz.
Also fascinating.
Maybe him. And I just saw somebody was posting again about his lament for his wife.
Dolce.
That's the famous, for his wife.
By the way, he is the most prolific paitan amongst all Rishonei Ashkenaz. More than 50 piyutim, mikol hasugim. So here he's got his wife, they got Soros there. He's writing he's writing for everything. You can't imagine. He's writing for everything. It's really remarkable.
He's amazing. And that would be a little Chassidei Ashkenaz, which we haven't done. So I don't know, maybe listeners have suggestions. They should email me, please, or WhatsApp me. Please reach out and let me know of any suggestions, and we'll take them under advisory. So thank you again, Rabbi Professor Kanarfogel, for joining me and discuss Maharam.
Very good, very good. Look, people should know how hard you prepare. He prepares very hard for these things. He doesn't just walk in there and turn on the button. It's which makes it very nice to talk to.
With you, it's easier. I could just press the button and you go. But okay, today was.
You got to press the button. Kol Tov. Let's hear.
All right.
Listen, let's hear Besaros Tovos for all the Eden everywhere. That's what we need. Besaros Tovos.
Amen. Thank you again.